A boy, pale and trembling, stumbles through the darkness of an upscale Utah neighborhood. His hands are raw, his ankles cut. Duct tape, tight, unforgiving, has left deep marks around his wrists. He is 12 years old, barefoot, starving, desperate. He knocks on a stranger's door, voice barely above a whisper. "Help me," he says. "I don't know where my siblings are, but if they're still there, they're going to die." That call for help unraveled a nightmare hiding in plain sight. For years, millions watched Ruby Franke, a mother, an influencer, a so-called parenting expert, share her life on YouTube. She smiled at the camera, offered advice, and preached discipline. But behind the screen, inside the walls of her home, the truth was much darker. That boy at the door? He was her son, and the horrors he escaped from would leave the world stunned. Ruby Franke was no ordinary mother. She was a brand, a business, and a phenomenon in the world of family vlogging. Born in Utah and raised in a deeply religious Mormon household, Ruby's values were steeped in faith, discipline, and the importance of traditional family roles. Her husband, Kevin Franke, was a soft-spoken college professor of engineering, logical, structured, and by all accounts, devoted to his family. Together, they had 6 children. Asheri, the eldest, responsible and independent. Chad, the second-born, struggling to live up to his parents' expectations. Abby, Julie, Russell, and Eve, the younger siblings who grew up in front of the camera, their every milestone broadcasted to millions. In 2015, the Frankes launched 8 Passengers, their family vlogging channel, which started as a simple documentation of their everyday lives. Morning routines, homeschooling sessions, birthday parties, family vacations. It wasn't just entertainment. It was parenting advice, discipline strategies, and moral guidance, all wrapped up in the aesthetic of a picture-perfect, devout American family. The audience was captivated. Viewers praised Ruby for her no-nonsense parenting approach. She wasn't the type to coddle her children. She believed in teaching responsibility, enforcing rules, and making sure kids faced the consequences of their actions. Values that resonated with many parents struggling to maintain authority in their own homes. By 2020, 8 Passengers had amassed over 2.3 million subscribers. Millions tuned in daily, hanging on to Ruby's every word. She had influence, she had power, and she used it to reshape the way thousands of parents discipline their children. But as the channel grew, so did the unease. Because Ruby's parenting methods weren't just strict. They were harsh, rigid, and some believed cruel. And the warning signs? They were right in front of everyone's eyes. The first major controversy erupted when Ruby uploaded a seemingly casual video about her son Chad. She revealed, almost offhandedly, that Chad had been sleeping on the floor for 7 months as punishment. No bed, no mattress, just the floor. Why? Because, according to Ruby, Chad had been acting out and needed to be taught a lesson. To some, this seemed excessive. But Ruby dismissed the criticism, insisting that tough love was necessary. Then, another disturbing moment. In one now infamous video, Ruby's 6-year-old daughter, Eve, forgot to pack her lunch for school. Instead of bringing it to her, Ruby laughed as she explained to the camera that Eve would have to go the entire day without food as a natural consequence. "She'll be hungry," Ruby said. "But she'll learn." The comment section erupted. Some parents applauded Ruby's firm approach. Others, however, were horrified. What kind of mother lets her child go hungry to prove a point? This isn't discipline. This is cruelty. Over time, more disturbing incidents began to surface. Ruby took away Christmas presents from her 2 youngest children, stating that they hadn't behaved well enough to deserve them. She publicly humiliated Chad in a video, saying that he was no longer allowed to see his friends because he wasn't trustworthy. But when Eve, at just 3 years old, misbehaved in a store, Ruby told the camera that she wouldn't hesitate to spank her right there if necessary. It wasn't just strict parenting. It was something darker, and yet nothing changed. 8 passengers continued to thrive. The subscribers kept growing. The sponsorship deals kept rolling in. Because who would believe that the perfect, all-American, church-going Franke family was capable of abuse? In 2021, Ruby made a decision that would push her parenting philosophy into even more dangerous territory. She partnered with Jodi Hildebrandt, a so-called mental health coach and founder of Connections, an extreme self-help program that promoted rigid discipline, emotional control, and absolute obedience. Jodi's teachings were controversial. She believed that children should be completely stripped of their autonomy, that they should be broken down emotionally and then rebuilt under absolute parental authority. And Ruby, she fully embraced it. Her parenting content became harsher, colder, more extreme. She began distancing herself from family members who didn't align with her new philosophy. By 2022, something strange happened. 8 passengers, once one of YouTube's most popular family channels, vanished. The videos stopped. The Instagram posts dried up. The once daily updates on family life ceased entirely. Fans speculated. Some assumed the family had simply decided to step away from social media. Others, however, feared the worst. And they were right, because behind the scenes, things were spiraling out of control. Ruby had moved in with Jodi Hildebrandt, taking some of her children with her. She cut off contact with her husband, Kevin. She disowned her eldest daughter, Sherry, who began speaking out about the emotional and physical abuse she had endured. By the time Ruby disappeared from YouTube, the truth was already closing in. And on August 30th, 2023, it all came crashing down. Ruby Franke, once a beloved family vlogger, was now facing the most horrifying allegations imaginable. The moment law enforcement stepped into Jodi Hildebrandt's Utah home, they knew something was terribly wrong. The house was eerily silent, the air thick with an unsettling stillness. Then they saw him, a 12-year-old boy, gaunt and trembling, his body covered in open wounds, deep bruises and scarring, his wrists and ankles raw, the skin rubbed away from being tied up with duct tape for hours, maybe days. The child had escaped through a window, sprinting barefoot down the street, desperate for help. His words, barely audible, sent chills down the responding officer's spine. "My siblings. They're still inside." Inside the house, officers found another child, a 10-year-old girl. She was curled up in a fetal position, her eyes hollow, her body frail from malnourishment. She could barely speak, barely move, and the moment she looked up at them, it was clear. She had been suffering for a long, long time. The initial police reports painted a disturbing picture of what these children had endured inside that house. According to investigators, Ruby Franke's children had been subjected to a starvation as a form of punishment, going days without food, isolation from their own family, including their father, Kevin, a physical restraints with duct tape used to bind their hands and ankles, sometimes for entire nights, a forced labor, performing chores for hours without rest or food, a verbal and emotional abuse with threats of even harsher punishments if they tried to escape. The abuse was systematic, calculated, and relentless. Each punishment was designed not just to discipline, but to break them. As authorities searched the home, they made more disturbing discoveries. No beds, no blankets, just bare floors where the children had been forced to sleep. Locks on doors designed to trap them inside rooms. The sparse, rotten food, while Ruby and Jodi ate full meals. The handwritten journals, filled with notes about the children's wrongdoings and the punishments they had received. But the most chilling discovery, the years of warning signs that had been ignored. A Kevin Franke, the children's father, had been cut off completely. Ruby had taken full control of the kids. A Jodi Hildebrandt, the so-called mental health coach, had a history of allegations related to abusive practices. And neighbors had noticed strange things, but no one acted fast enough. And when the police confronted Ruby and Jodi, their responses were terrifying. During the police interviews, Ruby Franke and Jodi Hildebrandt were cold, unemotional, and unwavering. They did not deny the abuse. They justified it. Jodi claimed the children were rebellious and needed to be taught discipline. Ruby, completely detached, insisted that she had done what was necessary to make them stronger, as she dismissed their injuries as self-inflicted, as she claimed they had been disobedient and needed to be retrained, as she even suggested that the public just didn't understand her parenting philosophy. But the evidence spoke louder than their lies. The medical reports confirmed severe malnutrition, open wounds, untreated infections, and chronic abuse. The witness testimonies from neighbors, former friends, and even Ruby's estranged daughter, Sherry, painted a picture of years of escalating cruelty. And now, the world was watching. Millions who had once subscribed to Ruby's parenting advice were now horrified by what had been happening behind closed doors. The perfect family was nothing more than a carefully crafted lie. And the people who had been warning about Ruby's extreme discipline for years, they had been right all along. The trial of Ruby Franke and Jodi Hildebrandt became one of the most high-profile child abuse cases in recent history. The courtroom was packed. Every seat filled with reporters, legal analysts, and horrified members of the public who had once followed Ruby's parenting advice online. The charges were severe: 6 counts of aggravated child abuse, each carrying the potential for decades behind bars. As the evidence was presented, the gruesome reality of what had happened behind closed doors came to light in excruciating detail. Text messages between Ruby and Jodi, casually discussing punishments that left the children starving and injured. Videos found on electronic devices, some showing disturbing interactions, others capturing cries for help. Medical records detailing severe malnutrition, untreated infections, and signs of prolonged physical abuse. Journal entries from the children, handwritten accounts of their fear, pain, and desperate wishes to escape. But it was Sherry Franke, Ruby's oldest daughter, who delivered the most devastating testimony. For years, Sherry Franke had been dismissed as rebellious. When she had spoken out against her mother's parenting in the past, she was silenced and ignored. But now, in front of the judge, jury, and the world, she made sure her voice was heard. "I tried to warn people," she said, her voice shaking. "I tried to tell them what was happening in that house, and no one listened." Sherry described how her mother isolated her siblings, keeping them under Jodi Hildebrandt's control. The psychological torment her younger brothers and sisters endured, being told they were bad, broken, and unworthy of love. The fear that kept them silent, the threats that if they spoke out, the punishments would get worse. She looked directly at her mother as she spoke, but Ruby Franke showed no emotion, no tears, no regret, just vacant indifference. After weeks of testimony, the jury returned with a verdict. Ruby Franke and Jodi Hildebrandt were found guilty on all 6 counts of aggravated child abuse. The courtroom erupted, some in relief, others in shock at what came next. The sentence? 4 to 6 years in prison. The reaction was swift and fierce. Legal experts debated whether the punishment fit the crime. Many argued that the level of torture and psychological trauma inflicted on the children warranted a far harsher sentence. The public was outraged. How could years of abuse, starvation, confinement, and physical restraint be met with such a short sentence? How did the justice system fail to recognize the depth of the cruelty these children endured? Even some of Ruby's own family members believed the punishment did not go far enough. One journalist called it a slap on the wrist for a lifetime of damage. What drives a mother to inflict such cruelty on her own children? And how does someone like Jodi Hildebrandt gain such dangerous control over another person's mind? Psychologists who studied the case believe that Ruby Franke fell under Jodi's influence gradually. Jodi had long been known for her extreme views on discipline, using fear and control as methods of fixing families. For years, she had presented herself as a life coach, someone who could rebuild broken relationships and instill order. But behind closed doors, her methods were anything but therapeutic. As she isolated clients from their families, as she convinced them that their loved ones were the enemy, as she twisted religious beliefs, telling parents they needed to break their children's will to make them obedient. Experts say Ruby Franke, already a strict disciplinarian, absorbed Jodi's ideology, taking it to its absolute extreme. By the time she was arrested, she had become fully indoctrinated. She truly believed she was doing the right thing, and that, according to experts, is what makes cases like this so terrifying. Because when someone believes their abuse is justified, the danger becomes limitless. Therapists specializing in child abuse trauma say that victims of this level of control and neglect often experience severe trust issues, struggling to form relationships after betrayal by their own parents, deep psychological scars with flashbacks, nightmares, and anxiety, a difficulty in expressing emotions after years of being punished for showing fear, sadness, or even hunger. The Franke family will never be the same. With Ruby Franke sentenced to 4 consecutive prison terms, each ranging from 1 to 15 years, she now faces the consequences of her actions. Jodi Hildebrandt, her partner in abuse, shares the same fate. But what about the children? They are the ones left to pick up the pieces, to heal from years of trauma, to find trust again, and to rebuild a life that was stolen from them. Sherry Franke, once the outspoken critic of her mother's parenting, has now taken on a new role as an advocate for her younger siblings. She has vowed to ensure they receive the help and support they need to move forward. But this case isn't just about one family. It's about a much bigger conversation, one that affects millions of families online. For years, family vloggers have shared their lives online, turning parenthood into profit. But at what cost? When children's private moments, their joys, fears, and even their punishments become entertainment for millions, where do we draw the line? The 8 passengers case is a wake-up call. It forces us to ask difficult questions. How much of a child's life should be public? When does parental discipline cross into abuse? Should there be stricter regulations on family vloggers? This isn't just a conversation for the courts. It's one for all of us. Now, we turn to you. What are your thoughts on this case? Do you think justice was served, or was the sentence too lenient? Should there be laws protecting children from the exploitation of family vlogging? And how can we prevent something like this from happening again? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. Let's keep the conversation going, because what happened to the Franke children should never happen again. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more in-depth crime investigations. Until next time, stay aware, stay critical, and most importantly, protect the vulnerable.